Welcome back, everybody. I've got to look at the date here. Thursday, December 3rd. John Aravosis here with Cliff Schechter and Dana Beyer. And let me tell you a little about Dana. I've known Dana, I guess we probably met, I don't know, was it 10 years ago probably? Or 13,
no, we're pushing 15, 17.
Yeah, come on, John. Jesus, be honest.
We're all older.
I know.
Turn of the century, turn of the millennium.
Turn of the century, there you go.
Oh, God.
Dana and I are turn of the century activists. No, Dana's an American transgender rights advocate, the former executive director of Gender Rights Maryland, a civil rights and advocacy organization serving Maryland's transgender community. She is also a transgender woman and an MD, a retired surgeon, served on...
Sat on lots of boards. Come on, John, give the credit.
Umpteen LGBT boards. Dana, what else am I missing here?
I'm a very proud grandmother of two.
Woo.
Oh, were you ever an astronaut too, or no?
No, I wanted to be an astronaut. You know this, New York. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we know how that goes.
I used to cut school repeatedly to watch the liftoffs of the Mercury program. And, there were times like for John Glenn's Freedom 7 liftoff where they'd cancel it 10 times. My mother finally caught on to me and figured out that I wasn't, seriously, fatally ill and that I should go back to school. But I still managed to stay home and watch the launch.
It's a good Ferris Bueller story. We appreciate it.
There you go. So,
is this like a New York Jewish thing where you all have to grow up to be astronauts, or what's the?
Well, no, I was because totally because Dana has accomplished so much in various, like surgeons.
You're all supposed to be doctors. Dana did that.
That's true.
Well, and look, we have the first U.S. senator who has been a citizen of the universe, not just his state. He was just sworn in last night.
John Glenn.
What?
Well,
John Glenn
John was up. John, that was after he was a senator. Now we have an active senator who has also spent a year in space out of his.
Was he there for a year? I didn't remember.
Yeah,
I have to say quickly, John, because being in Ohio, I got to meet John Glenn once, and he was everything that you and when they show the way they portrayed him in Hidden Figures as like the guy who wasn't racist and wanted to hear from the women was everything that I saw here. So from you and I, from the thing we always talk about messaging, I'll just say in 2 seconds, I think one of the biggest mistakes ever when he ran for president in '84, he ran on his Senate record. He was a guy that had been in space. He'd been a fighter pilot. Basically, his whole campaign in the primary against Mondale should have just been pictures of him in space and in a fighter pilot uniform, and he would have won. But neither here nor there. Let's continue.
Well, Dukakis learned that lesson for himself 4 years later.
He sure did.
Well, okay, so let me just precursor why we're here today. So Dana and I have known each other a long time. Dana, I'm not sure where to start here. I guess I still want to sort of prep the audience. So what I was hoping today would be, and we'll see where it goes, I told Dana, almost like transgender 101 discussion, but then we can also get to transgender 301 discussion too, which for you foreign people, that means beginning level college course in America. Because I think it reminds me of working on gay issues 20 years ago, where I always used to have the stupid discussions with people, and I used to welcome them, and I still do. As long as people's hearts were in the right place, I wanted them to ask me the dumb questions, because otherwise they weren't learning. And I feel like on trans issues, and frankly, every issue I've ever worked on, especially now with social media, I think you get beaten up a lot when you ask the dumb questions, and I think people need to ask the dumb questions so they learn.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we've seen the culture has changed. The sort of sensitivity, the fragility of people on many, many issues has really been ramped up. So that whereas in the past, it was sort of questionable. And, we talked about this earlier. There's context. You do not walk up to somebody on the street and grab their groin and say, what are your genitalia like? Which some people want to
do. Are you trans?
People, right?
Well, that's just a Donald Trump move to everyone.
Yeah, that's true. That would be.
There you go. So that's been normalized in a way. So in that case, then yes, no, that's absolutely offensive. But when you're trying to teach people, you should be open to answering any questions. And I have been doing this for a long time, and I always say at the get-go, there is no question that is too stupid, because there is so much ignorance on this. We don't teach this in high school biology. We don't teach this in college biology. We barely even touch it in medical school biology. So you cannot assume people know anything. And
I would add just quickly, just because of discrimination in the past, John, I think, made an apt comparison to gay rights 20 years ago, is that even if you're somebody who's liberal, even if you're somebody, or whatever way you want to describe it, but who's pro everyone's rights and, is not someone who judges and is not someone who's discriminatory, you just may not know many people. I mean, that's the thing, is that I wish I had more transgender friends. I want more friends of every group, but I don't have many. And that, for that reason, there's a lot I don't know.
Right. So let's start with simply the numbers. There's a reason why you don't have many. It's not because you're transphobic. It's because we make up 0.6% of the U.S. population,
right,
and probably the global population. So it's really hard to get to know somebody. Now, we see, as more people come out, as the culture has changed, as our rights have been growing, the Bostock decision, we can talk about that. I mean, it's a lot easier to come out now and be out there and be approached by people, or maybe even just in your house of worship or your supermarket or something. It's less uncomfortable to come out and say hi, and then eventually the discussion gets to that. When I speak to chambers of commerce, for instance, which we just had one here for the Maryland LGBT chamber, I say, if you really want to be accepted, you bring your skills, your experience, your knowledge to whatever job you're trying to do, nonprofit, profit, corporate, whatever. Then you leave your identity at the door. You do your job, and once you start doing your job, people recognize the value that you bring, and then you can discuss your identity. You can discuss who your partner is and what your children are like. But you don't come in and say, I want you to hire me because, I'm a great parent and I've got 2 lovely kids, so hire me. You don't do that. You don't say, I'm gay, you need to hire me. And that leads to the whole identity politics thing and affirmative action. And we really shouldn't have to be there, but, we are. So we have to deal with it. But.
Okay, so I thought you were going to jump in. I wasn't sure. So Dana, you, from what I was reading of your bio, you came out to your parents at age 11.
Well, 7, but then they sort of, buried it. And as a 7-year-old, what could I explain? It was hard to explain it to them, so they could ignore it. It was a
Can I ask that dumb question as part of this? I mean, along the lines, because it fits in with what you're saying, which is, was 7 when you first felt you knew?
That's my earliest memory. Well, actually, I have a memory when I was 6 where I wanted to strangle my brother in his crib. But other than that, I don't remember. I don't remember anything before that. So my earliest memory now that's clear, that I know it's a memory and it's not, from watching home videos or stuff that's sort of imposed on me, was when I was 7 and I was watching TV. When we had, like 3 channels and WPIX and WOR in New York.
Hit the side of the TV to get it to work. Yeah.
That's right. You had to.
We all remember those things, right?
And get up and walk over to the
4 channels and all you get to sit there with the damn thing, like adjusting it and putting it out the window. The good old
you children were their parents' remote, right? The father would say, get up and take the channel.
I remember that.
You got your exercise doing that. And I was watching a commercial for Breck shampoo. And Breck used the typical Aryan type of girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. And I went, damn, that's me. Isn't that who I am? And then I look in the mirror and I go, no. So something's a little wrong here. But I came out when I was 11, and they threatened to have me institutionalized.
Well, can I just tell you, I don't want to. I was going to say, I'm going to hit Cliff. I don't want to out your age, but this is the early 1960s you're talking about.
Right? Yeah. I'm 68. And
I mean, that's amazing when you think. It's hard enough, I suspect, to come out now as trans or gay. I came out in the 1990s as gay. That was hard. I can't even imagine the 1960s.
Well, and I'd like to spin this positively. I consider myself extremely privileged to have lived through basically the entirety of the LGBT rights movement. I mean, I wasn't there when Frank Kameny was carrying a picket in front of the White House. I acknowledge that, but I was downtown in Greenwich Village on June 29th, 1969. So I was at the Stonewall Uprising, inadvertently, but I was still there. And so I've lived,
like, what the hell?
There are a bunch of us, actually.
Hey, listen, you guys think they're courageous. I came out as Jewish in rural parts of Ohio. Try that.
Well, I did that too in Mississippi. So
no, that's right. Mississippi.
I just had to make a joke, but I want to ask you this seriously.
So for me, coming out on a regular basis is sort of normal. And those of us who are minorities and minorities and minorities and minorities have to do it all the time. And one of the beauties of America, at least if you're not Black, is that you can do that and still build a life, right? Without having to deal with oppression every single day. You don't wake up and look in the mirror and go, oh my God, I'm a Black American and God knows what's going to happen to me today. Now, I say that not because we're going to talk about that, but because as a child, I always got up, went to wash my face and brush my teeth, looked in the mirror and say, that's not who I am. Right. That was
Can I ask you quickly? Can I ask you quickly about that? Because again, I'm sorry, but here's the dumb questions that I want to know.
You're the one who's asking dumb questions, right? That's your role.
That's my role today.
No.
Well, you came out. You said you first knew at 7, or at least you first said that's me at 7, and then you jumped to 11, which is fine. But I'm wondering if those 4 years, were there a lot of other times like that where you were put in situations like, you're separated boys and girls, you're put on the boys team in recess and you felt like that's the wrong place?
Yes, I mean, I did my nails once and tried to go to school. My father caught me and whipped me and, stuff like that. So
a lot of that you were dealing with this over 4 years.
It was, I hate to use the word an obsession because, today OCD is a different kind of thing, but it was always present in my mind. I would have to compartmentalize it in order to get on with my life. Now, there is an advantage to that because when something is taking control of your interests, of what you're looking at, what you're thinking about, and you learn how to then compartmentalize it, you can really focus on what you need to do. And in my case, that was schooling. I went to school for 10 hours a day in a Jewish day school called the yeshiva. And so I got a much better education because I was trans and was able to focus my attention on what I needed to do to create a life for myself. So, again, being resilient is probably the most important thing for any gay or trans person, because it allows you to make the most of your life. You only have one, and then you go ahead and do what you can. Because of what I went through when I was a kid, I remember when I was driving back, I was taking my kids to visit my old neighborhood in Queens, and we drove by Long Island Jewish Hospital, which is where my parents threatened to take me to a psychiatrist to, get the devil out of me or whatever it was people said in those days. And they had a gender clinic there when we drove by, and I started crying. Because that was my goal as an activist, or just simply as a human being. I didn't want any child to go through the misery that I did. And this is relevant because 2 days ago, the United Kingdom High Court ruled that 16-year-olds weren't cognitively advanced enough to give informed consent for gender therapy, for any kind of hormonal or you don't operate on 16-year-olds except in very rare exceptions. So for hormonal therapy, and so you're telling a 16-year-old, you can't understand yourself well enough. I knew when I was 7. I certainly knew much better when I was 11, and nobody was going to tell me. Now, it's important to make this statement because I've run into this multiple times. People would often ask, well, what do you mean you knew you were a girl?
Well, I wanted to keep going, but I wanted to ask you more about that.
Right. I mean, how do you know? Well, it's not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's embedded in who you are. You're wired that way. I mean, I think, and I've studied enough philosophy, people talk about the ego and being, or Heidegger called it Dasein and stuff, that your sense of your I, the capital I,
right.
That's the core of who we are as individuals. But right above that, if you were thinking of this sort of as an onion, the next layer is your sex. You just know it. I mean, and we've discovered through research for decades that human beings understand their gender identity between ages 3 and 4 in most cases. Right? Not always. Some kids I know, I dated somebody who said she knew when she was 2, and somebody else, and I've helped run support groups, say, well, I didn't really know until I was 15 or whatever, until after puberty. But for the most part, most human beings develop a sense of their brain sex, which we call gender identity, between 3 and 4. So it's not at all surprising that would happen. But it's not a feeling, it's not an emotion. I mean, this happens to everybody. You just looked in the mirror and you saw a boy, and everybody was calling you boy and Cliff or John or whatever, and that all made sense, and it was seamless, and it was the default. That's, like I mentioned, black person looking in the mirror, that's not the default American, right? You're not white, so you have to deal with it. If a boy's looking in the mirror, somebody raised as a boy, assigned male at birth is the phrase we use now, and looks in the mirror and goes, but I'm a girl, there's an incongruence there. There's that sort of cognitive dissonance, and you live with that your entire life. We call that gender dysphoria now. That's how you bill it out if you go into a therapist and stuff. That's basically what being trans is about. Now, I do want to say, because you wanted to do Trans 101, the consensus in the medical community, in the scientific community, is that trans is a form of intersex. And so this is where we get into the difference between sex and gender. Well, by definition, it is. And science works on definitions. You have to be very precise.
Okay, stop a second. Define intersex then, because I always thought intersex meant hermaphrodite. Or
right. Well, hermaphrodite,
what is intersex then?
Hermaphrodite is as archaic a term as, say, transvestite is, right?
Okay.
So hermaphrodites referred to, going back to biblical times, to people with both testes and ovaries.
Okay.
Very, very rare, that kind of true hermaphrodite.
Okay.
Right.
And there are all the pseudo-hermaphrodites, which are basically all the intersex conditions. These are chromosomal variations, genetic variations, in what are called inborn errors of metabolism, that roughly, and it varies on
Klinefelters and all that kind of stuff?
Klinefelters, right. Klinefelters is the most common chromosomal intersex variation.
That's intersex. I did not know. Okay.
And actually, believe it or not, and I got into a little Twitter debate with somebody over this yesterday, quite a number of Klinefelters are raised as boys and generally develop in a male pattern, but there are a whole bunch of them. Not that there are many Klinefelters people. It's 1 out of 500 to 1 out of 800, live births.
Tell people it's an extra chromosome, right?
Extra X chromosome. It's XXY. So, but one of those X's is inactivated. So this is why you can live a normal
double
life.
XY, like when we learned about double Y, those are the ones that are more likely to show up at a hockey rink and punch someone in the face, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, you can't just be double Y. That fetus.
Well, I meant double YX. There was an extra
XYY, right?
Right. That's what I meant. An extra Y chromosome. We always learned about there. In any case.
But and I hate to say this to men, but the Y chromosome is really puny, and it's been falling apart over the past couple of million years, and it's probably not going to last. So I don't know. But
listen, say what you want to men. We as a group, we've fucked everything up the last 10,000 years. So really, say all you'd like.
Okay, so
Margaret Thatcher.
Right, maybe the SRY gene.
John finds the exception, of course.
Which is the SRY gene, which is on the Y chromosome.
Okay, John, be quiet and let Dana speak.
Sorry, go on, Dana.
The SRY gene, which is on the Y chromosome, will probably jump to some other chromosome, and you'll still exist. But maybe that'll simply mute the worst characteristics of men. I don't know. But so you've got all those chromosomal variations, and depending on who you ask, roughly anywhere from, I guess, 1 to 3% of live births are considered intersex. And all intersex means it's not the pure male or female pattern. Now, it's important to understand sex is not what most people think when I talk to them. They think sex means penetrative copulation.
Okay.
I mean, this is what people think sex is. It's even today, right? You go into any group of people and ask, define sex for me, and 9 out of 10 will say it's about that. It's not about that. It's about chromosomes and genes and the dance in time of the way the genes are developing in utero and all of that. It's about genitals and gonads. It's about hormones and hormone receptors. It's about secondary sex characteristics. And most importantly, in human beings, it's about brain sex. And we all have a brain sex. And it appears to be binary. I hate to say that. I know it infuriates a lot of trans people, and particularly non-binary people, but non-binary is a gender thing and intersex is a sex thing, and we all have a brain sex. And even intersex people generally know that they are either male or female. Even if there is some conflict in some secondary sex characteristic or in their genitals, maybe their testes have not descended into the scrotum, they're still up in the groin, things like that. That's intersex. Okay, not the normal pattern.
I've got to interrupt because I wanted to ask you something about this, and it's relevant with what you're saying right now. And I'm going to preface this by saying my question almost reminds me of when we talk about gay issues. Years ago, Robin Tyler was on Crossfire, I think. God bless Robin, longtime LGBT lesbian activist out in California, amazing woman. And Robin Tyler, another Jew. Robin's amazing, but Robin, I think, was on Crossfire, or no, she was on Hannity and Combs. That was it. And I think this was the episode that I refused to go on because my mom made me swear I would never go on Hannity's show ever. 20 years ago, I kid you not. So Robin goes on. They're talking about gay stuff, and some right-wing homophobe is there with Hannity, and they're all debating Hannity and Combs, right? And the homophobe says something about being gay being a choice because, come on, I could do that stuff if I wanted to. I mean, I'd like to, but I don't because I choose not to. And Hannity goes, wait a minute. And my point was that on sexual orientation, I'm guessing gender identity too, people always assume that their experience is the defining experience. So basically, this guy was admitting he was either bi or 60-40 gay straight.
Right. Who is this you're talking about, John?
I have to Google the transcript because I found it before.
I mean, that's hilarious to me. I found, that's my theory of conservatism in general, which is there's unless whatever their experience has been, both if they lacked a negative experience, like, the police have never bothered me, or if it's or it's a different type of experience where, like, I find these people attractive, so we better make laws so that you can't do anything because everybody else must be like me. And we're like, no, I don't. You need to grapple with who, and come to conclusion
and that's
as to who
very
you are.
common, right? I mean, that's everybody on whatever issue you're talking about. And I do want to make
Dana, wait, stop. But here's my question. I was prefacing it by saying, I hope I'm not saying something stupid that I'm ascribing my experience. I, years ago, not too long ago, ran into an old friend, and he had confided to me, he had confided to me 20 years ago that he thought he might be trans, right? And, I don't even know the language to use. He's a guy now, whatever the fuck language one uses for this. But he thinks he might be trans, meaning he thinks he might be a woman. And it was really eating at him, but he wasn't going to do anything about it. And I remember the discussion and I told him, and I still feel this way now, like, I don't think about being a guy at all. It doesn't really register in my brain what that even, well, here's my question, but that's what I mean. Like, it's gay and straight. I can at least say, well, okay, Cliff, do you want to sleep with girls or not? Or do you sometimes want to sleep with boys because that means you might be 10% gay? Like, I can figure that out. But on the trans thing,
women more than girls, John, if we're being honest.
I know. Well, that's a gay. We say boys and girls sometimes, and we don't mean it. But that's an issue I have on trans stuff is when it's explained to me, I sometimes feel like I don't even know how to gauge this because I don't think of myself in my head like, oh, yes, I definitely prefer being a guy. I'm not a woman. It doesn't even register, but does it not register because the default kind of is what it is? Or do some men even in their head know they're men kind of thing?
If you're, again, because the default is the vast majority of people, 99.4% of the population is cisgender, to use the term, which I helped recoin back in 2003 and gotten a lot of crap from gay men who hate the word sissy, and they think somehow they're homophonic, so therefore I'm being offensive to them by calling them cis gay men. Okay, you know who I'm speaking of.
They're spelled differently.
They're spelled differently, but they sound the same, so it's a problem. But it's simply, instead of saying non-trans, there's a word. And I'm an organic chemist, and it makes sense. But anyway, so I think it's important to note that it'd probably be very hard to go through life and not know that you had gay desires, right? As a man or a woman, right? But for being trans, I would say even today, probably the majority of trans people are deeply closeted, have never been out, have never told anybody, or maybe they just told a friend, and that's it. You're still trans. If your brain sex is female and your body is male and you're out in the world that way, you're still trans, but you're presenting as a man and you should be referred to as a man. And so that's sort of a default. And we actually polled on that. When we first did the first national trans survey, we asked people who characterized themselves at the time as male cross-dressers. Used to be called transvestites in Germany.
I remember that.
That was the term that was used. We don't do the German anymore. But they were male cross-dressers, and we asked, well, do you think of yourself as men, or do you think of yourselves as women? And 52% said they were trans women and would transition if they could. if their finances or their social circumstance or their family would allow them to do that.
Right.
And knowing many of these folks over decades, I would say that's probably pretty accurate. But some of them would say, no, I'm a man. I like having a penis. I like being a man. I just like dressing as a woman occasionally. So, there are different types. But trans women and trans men know it's embedded in us that this is who we are and there's something wrong. So that old cliche, which a lot of kids don't like today, but still works. It's a bumper sticker slogan, but it works, is a woman trapped in a man's body or vice versa.
Right.
It really is correct because your brain, right, your mind is trapped in your brain, which is in your body, and it doesn't fit the skin that you have on and all of that.
Right.
That's the reality. And everybody knows that if pushed to it. And I remember I used to do a thought experiment back during the Iraq War. And I would say to a room of men, so it's just imagine you're walking down the street in Baghdad and you step on an IED and you wake up in the recovery room and you put your hands down on your groin and there's nothing there. There's just a hole where your junk used to be. Are you a man or a woman? And all the guys, after squirming and sweating and everything like that, would go, well, I'm a man. I mean, sure, of course I'm a man. I go, but you don't have a penis or scrotum anymore. How can you be a man? Well, I just know. I said, well, I just knew too. And it's really that.
It's actually a great way of putting it, like in terms of teaching people, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and it
take
really
away the physical, right?
Remember we used to say, I mean, straight people used to say this. They go, sex is between the ears. It's not between the legs. And in a very profound way, when it comes to brain sex, that's true. Now, I am not saying that men have brain one and women have brain two and never the twain shall meet. Brains are far more heterogeneous and there's so much more overlap between the sexes. But there is a sexual dimorphism in human bodies and in the human brain when it comes to this foundational identity. That's what being trans is about. And it's intersex because by definition, you have one piece of your anatomy that is one sex and the other pieces that are the other sex. And there are all sorts of combinations. Now, you mentioned Robin Tyler. I like Robin. She, the kind of gruff, kind of old school lesbian. Now, the most common intersex condition is called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And this affects both XYs and XXs, but it becomes an issue for XXs. These female fetuses are putting out much more male steroids, PEDs, the Mark McGuire, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds kind of steroids that are impacting the fetus, the female fetus, which develops with female anatomy, but it's being masculinized is the term that we use. And so these girls turn out to a large degree to be butch lesbians. And
are you talking about when there's evidence when men use these PEDs that they're offspring?
No, not the men who use it. And I'm a DES baby, and we can get into that later. That DES does have transgenerational effects, but it's only through the female who with the ovary.
So it's when a woman uses it.
But when a woman, no, she doesn't use it. So if you have the genetic makeup with an inborn error of metabolism, quote unquote, where the fetus, which is XX and would normally develop purely as a female, is exposed to higher levels of androstenedione and all the other drugs that, the ball players used to use. But this is your adrenal gland pumping this stuff out. You become masculinized. Then we've done studies with rats and mice and all that. So we've seen this. And you've got a whole class, and I think a lot of lesbians are suffering from, quote unquote, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It's a very wide spectrum. You can be off the spectrum and be a trans man, or you could just have a little touch of it and be a little bit more aggressive or whatever. But
again, I'll let you be the one to get in trouble here. But basically, are you sort of describing the condition of being butch, basically? Like a butch
there are some. I'm saying the condition of being butch, but not all butch lesbians have CAH. Nobody's ever studied this. But when you read about it, when you study CAH, you go, oh, well, that must create a person who would have these attributes, and you go, oh, I know a bunch of women like that.
Right.
And I put the two together. Now, nobody's ever done a survey. Nobody's ever studied them, taken blood or anything like that. So it's hard to tell, but it makes perfect sense. So for me, in my case, my mother took a drug called DES, diethylstilbestrol, in 1951 after she miscarried her first pregnancy. Back in 1948, two doctors at Harvard created this super estrogen, DES, in the hopes of preventing miscarriages. Because after the war, people, the guys came back home, they wanted to start families, they were desperate to do it, and miscarriages became that much more painful to the family. So they came up with this drug in the hope of preventing miscarriage. It didn't work. They hadn't done the studies on it. When they finally did the studies, they showed it didn't work. They still used it anyway, and eventually 5 million women took this. Well, myself with a couple of other scientists proved that DES causes transsexualism. We knew that DES causes homosexuality, but we learned that it causes transsexualism too.
Is transsexualism transgender now? I mean, what?
Yeah. So we'll go into the language in a little bit.
That was the old language. Yeah.
Right. But we were originally called transsexual people.
Okay.
Magnus Hirschfeld in the teens, 100 plus years ago, at the Tiergarten in Berlin at the Institute for Sexual Science, was the first guy to study this. And that was then passed on to Harry Benjamin, who came to New York and set up the first clinics for trans women. The term was transsexual back when John Money started the work at Hopkins in 1966. And when Christine Jorgensen came back to the States in 1952, shortly after I was born, she was the blonde bombshell, the first publicly trans person in America. And she was called transsexual. But just the way you gay guys, decided to remove the sex from homosexuality in order to make gay people a little bit less frightening to others who, when they heard homosexual, were thinking of two guys copulating. We removed the sex from transsexuality, to do the same thing because everybody thought we were sex workers.
It also sounds, it sounds very, you're right. I never had thought of the connection, but it sounds very clinical. My objection to homosexual, first of all, is studies show, during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, they were showing studies where the polls where gay would have 10% points higher for support for gays in the military than homosexuals in the military, right? I never quite thought about it from the sexual term. The word always hit me as being very clinical, like a disease. But you're right, transsexual sounds even more sexualized in my head. Yeah.
Right. But that's why our adversaries continue to use it. They don't talk about the gay community. They still talk about the homosexual community, right?
It's true. Yeah.
And so we went to transgender. Now, transgender, interestingly, a little bit of factoid from the 80s. A woman named Virginia Prince was a male crossdresser, and she decided, well, I need to distinguish myself from all those transsexual people who want to change their sex surgically and hormonally. And so she coined the term transgender to just cover male crossdressers. And eventually in the 90s, when trans became a national movement with Transsexual Menace and NTAC, we sort of we agreed that, maybe we'll all be transgender and we can live together. And we did. It was never easy. There were always battles, just the way there have been battles in the gay community between twinks and hairs and leather and all that stuff. But so the trans umbrella started growing and kept growing, and drag queens and drag kings, any sexual minority that had a gender variant presentation became sort of trans.
Right.
That stuff matters. And I want to point out why language matters particularly. So I've been involved with WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Trans Health. There are a lot of doctors, a lot of scientists who have been involved in this for years. I think it was formed in 1979, named after Harry Benjamin, that physician I told you who had learned with Magnus Hirschfeld. By the way, Magnus Hirschfeld's archives of the Institute of Sexual Science were burned in a book burning by the Nazis in 1933. So I would just say that trans lawyers should not lend themselves to supporting book burnings, even of horrendous right-wing tracts about trans people. There's an irony there that should not go unnoticed. But anyway, the work that was done in 1966 when John Money set up the Hopkins program, the Sexual Behavioral Consultation Unit, which then led to one general reconstruction a month for about 10 years. It's not a lot of people, mind you, 12 times 10, 120. I got to know some of those women. I even went for an intake evaluation in 1972 and ran away totally frightened because they thought being trans was about being penetrated by a penis. That's all they thought trans women wanted in those days. Now, the clinics started to grow, though, because there was this interest in the 60s. It was sort of a thing with, women's rights and civil rights and anti-war and all of that. And these clinics were formed. And parents, when they heard about this, would send their very femme boys into these clinics. They didn't care about tomboys. The girls didn't matter, right? Still don't matter to a large degree. But if your boy was acting in a feminine way, you wanted to send that kid to a shrink. Jewish parents usually wouldn't, because they were more afraid of being associated with sending their kids to a shrink than whatever the problem was. But Cliff laughs at that. That was true for my parents. They didn't want anybody to know, not because there was something weird about gender. There was like a shrink. My child doesn't need a shrink anyway. So even though most of the shrinks were Jewish.
You could do a whole Seinfeld episode on it.
That's right. This is great. And maybe we should at some point, Transparent should have had something like that in it. So,
right.
So most of the kids who were sent to therapy and whose numbers have been added into the literature on this, so that when the stuff was published by the psychologists and the psychiatrists who were doing this work, that's where you get, and you've probably heard this, the desistance number, 80% desistance.
I've not heard that, actually.
You haven't?
Mm-mm.
No, okay. Well, this is what's thrown out by the right wing. They're getting smarter. They're using medical terms. They created a disease called rapid onset gender dysphoria to describe parents whose kids come out to them and they go, wow, what a surprise. When did that happen? That must have happened overnight. Must be a virus or a social contagion.
Virus.
Yeah, this is what my parents
Can
thought.
you wear a mask and prevent it? I heard those don't work on anything.
They don't work at all. You shouldn't even bother to do that. Don't waste your time.
Right.
So,
okay.
Though they did that, and the studies came out and showed that 80% of these femme boys desisted from thinking of themselves as girls, or from dressing as girls, or identifying as girls and stuff like that. And only 5% of them persisted. So desisted versus persisted.
Okay.
But what they never did is they never distinguished proto-gay boys from trans girls.
Okay, it's just funny. And I kind of, in a minute, I want to get back to general topics, because this is good, but this is almost going to get too nerdy for people. But because that was an interesting thing you just said, because some of what you're describing as a gay man, I'm kind of going, well, but some of what you're describing has been my experience as a gay man. So are not you, but is one trying to argue nowadays, for example, that gay men are on the spectrum of trans? That
No.
But I mean, is that because I almost think like, the way I asked this too, actually, there was a guy working for Google doing like public outreach, and they must have been Pride or something. They sent like profiles of 6 Google LGBT employees.
Right,
and
I know they do that.
Did you see that? And one of them, his claim to fame as being LGBT was being non-binary.
Right.
But his description was something to the effect of, I'm a guy, but I've never felt totally comfortable with guys. I've always been kind of more femmy and into girl stuff, but I don't think of myself as a girl, but I never fit in with guys. And I'm reading this going, dude, you're fucking gay. But I mean, what bothered me was his definition of non-binary was the definition of gay. It wasn't what you're saying about trans, for example, where you're like, no. I looked in the mirror. This was the wrong person.
Right.
But in any case, it's sort of, but you got me thinking on the trans thing, you almost were veering towards describing what gay is there, saying, yes, as I'll put on the guy's side, right. I certainly have some feminine characteristics, and a lot of gay men do, actually. A lot of gay men.
Right,
my mom noticed this when she first came out to DC after I'd come out to her, and came out here and was like meeting my friends, and she'd go, there's something very sweet and kind about them in their face, their mannerism. She noticed in everybody there was something just a little, again, I would use the term feminine. She was trying not to. In any case,
there's no question about it, which is why, look, you're not gay until you hit puberty, right? We don't have to get into Freudian latent sexuality.
I mean, I knew when I was 5 years old, as far as that goes, but
yeah, but you didn't know that you liked boys per se because you weren't a sexual being. But you knew there was something different about you.
But I liked boys and I didn't like girls. I didn't dislike girls, but there was.
Yeah, it wasn't a sexual thing though. It was something.
It wouldn't have been sexual, but there was something.
There was something, right?
I was always into guys, and I mean, I would play with girls. It wasn't that, but I would. Guys were.
You would more likely play with girls than straight boys would play with girls who had.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So That's the difference. And that's what parents would see, because they would see their kids at play. Parents wouldn't sit down and have philosophical discussions with their 5-year-olds, but they would watch the way the play was going. You were more gentle. You didn't play football, yada, yada, yada. So, but the point is, all of these non-gender conforming, is a better term, boys, quote unquote boys, were lumped together in these studies. There was no distinction between trans girls like me who would come in and say, I know I'm a girl. This isn't about playing with Barbies or wearing a boa or wearing my mother's high heels. I just know I'm a girl. And trans girls are generally far more boring and just sort of quotidian girls, whereas proto-gay boys are far more flamboyant and femi and stuff like that. It's not hard to make the distinction, but there's no blood test or imaging study to do it.
Oh, no, I see kids today, and I see either colleagues, young boys, or just in the park or something, and this kid could be 3, 4, 5, or 6, and I'm going, oh my God, he's so queer.
That's right.
Oh, and they don't, and whether they have any idea.
We can talk about queer. So language is important. The problem was Ken Zucker, who ran the Toronto clinic, was profusely putting out this data and not thinking, not distinguishing. And we would have knockdown, drag out fights at annual conferences saying you can't do that. 80% desistance, of course. These are gay boys. They don't want to be girls. They just want to drag, or they want to do whatever. They want to be bottoms and what have you. Look, back in the 70s, there was a guy named Jim Farad, who was very active in the Gay Liberation Front, or forget which of the New York organizations back at the beginning of the movement, who decided, because of his own internalized homophobia, which we discussed 5 years ago, and we became friends. He said, I came up with this philosophy about trans women where I said that they were really extremely gay men who could not accept their homosexuality and therefore went to extreme lengths to get rebuilt so that they could be penetrated without the stigma of being considered gay. Now, why did he feel that? Because he was a bottom and he was ashamed of being a bottom. Because homophobia,
he was using his own life experience, which was what I brought up earlier.
Homophobia is driven by misogyny. It's all misogyny. The tops have never been looked down upon. And even biblically speaking, in Leviticus, those two sentences are directed at bottoms, not at tops, explicitly. But nobody listens to that. Anyway, so it does matter. And so we are still being attacked in 2020 for scientific research that was done in the 1990s and the aughts and stuff that included all these gay boys who then went out and were boys, but they were gay.
And
and
Dana,
now the High Court in England is using it against trans kids.
I'm going to stop you again. I want you to wrap this up because I really want to get to these sort of quotidian issues.
Now, you were talking about Robin Tyler. Our friend Robin Oakes, you know Robin, right? The leader of the bisexual community, came out a couple of days ago with a Facebook post saying, I want to bring you up to date on the terms used in the LGBTQ community. And it's important because you made the point about non-binary. And this is very confusing because today, whereas in the past, trans and gay were conflated, primarily because the federal code uses them synonymously. That's how we got, because of sex in Bostock, that's how trans people drag gay people along to get our rights. That's a whole different discussion. But to me, that was the culmination of my political advocacy. We won. But language matters. And sex and gender are different. Trans people are trans because of their sex. Non-binary people are non-binary because of their gender choices. It's not a biological phenomenon. Now, back in the 90s, or even the late 80s, we started seeing people like you talked about, that gay kid, saying, well, I live with it. They called themselves gender benders, gender blenders, gender. I remember
gender bending was the term.
Ultimately, they sort of got subsumed under the term gender queer. And gender queer is sort of, since the academic creation of the word non-binary at around the turn of the century, they've sort of subsumed now gender queer into non-binary.
And now it's all been thrown into LGBTQ and some other letters that I can.
Well, it depends. Capital Q, yes, because capital Q queer is the entire.
Oh no, there's capital and small Q's too.
The small Q is kids who, when you do, there was a poll that was done. The first one showed that 6% of LGBT people identify as queer. They don't identify as gay. They don't identify as lesbian.
Right.
What
Lesbian
does that mean?
What does that mean?
It means, it doesn't really matter. I don't want the label. I don't want to be gay. I don't want to be lesbian. I don't want to be trans. I want to smash the gender binary, or I don't care about it. And I just want to be queer, which can be anything. And there's value to that. And that's how they decided. And
I'm not judging. I'm just wondering.
Right,
I'm trying to figure out.
I'm judging a little bit, actually, because.
Well, but there's the problem by saying queer, because a lot of my older gay.
I'm using it colloquially. That's the thing.
Right.
I'm using it in the old sense, meaning he's a big fag. I'm not using it meaning, well, he isn't necessarily lesbian, gay, bi, or trans. He just doesn't like gender norms. Because to me, that's an activist sociology approach to an issue, which is fine. You want to be some activist sociologist type who says, I don't like gender norms because they've oppressed women for years. That does not make you LGBT. That simply means you're a feminist or something, which is fine. But these.
Oh, then you're going to get an argument there, because the non-binary community.
Oh, trust me, I know I'll get an argument there.
The non-binary community has been growing. It's growing amongst Gen Z and some millennials.
Yeah.
And they subsume all the genderqueer people. The problem is, and that's fine. Again, as I said, it's a political, socio-political choice.
Right.
You can do that for all the reasons you mentioned. If sexism can't be, completely extinguished and misogyny can't be, why don't we just sort of like the Kobayashi Maru, let's just change the terms of the
oh my God, the fact that you brought Star Trek into this discussion,
Star Trek geek moment together.
Yes. Well, there you go. Right. If you can't win the game, you change the rules of the game. Right. So the best way to get rid of misogyny is get rid of women. Now, I personally, as a woman,
there's a quote.
Right. Yeah. So, but you understand the impetus.
That seems like that might offend some people.
Right, but I understand. Well, first of all, you're not proposing it, but you're quoting the movement.
People do. There's in queer theory, there's that belief that, wouldn't we all be better off if we were all non-binary, and then you wouldn't have, this kind of misogyny.
Wait, can I ask? And we're going to get into way too. I literally have specific issues I want to talk about too.
601, right?
Well, no, because it's what you're making me wonder is some of this the reason you've got all these blow-ups with the feminist movement, or even JK Rowling, although now I know I'm bringing up multiple issues.
I think so.
No, I'm interested in this too, John, because I'm wondering if this is because I've heard this.
This wiping out women concept is what I heard.
I'm involved in various pro-choice groups, right? And there are folks among those groups who will say, well, if you get rid of, obviously, the term of who is a woman and who is not, then you can't fight for, quote, women's rights, the right to choose and that kind of thing. So definitions matter. And so that's why.
Right. And this has come up. And when I used to write a weekly column for the Huffington Post for almost 7 years, until about 3 years ago. And this issue did come up. You mentioned choice movement. There was, I think it was Planned Parenthood in Houston and by the way, Planned Parenthood is extremely accepting of trans men as far as their reproductive care goes, even abortions or whatever. Okay. They are open, inclusive. There's never been a problem with that.
But this is where I'll say quickly, as a disclosure, I've been on the board here in Ohio, and I mean, where I was here anyhow, completely accepting of everything.
Yeah, so, nationally they're perfectly fine. So that's never been an issue. So that's why this is even more ironic. There was a group in Houston that said you have to stop talking about pregnant women. It excludes us. You have to talk about pregnant persons. And this has come on repeatedly. Right. The most extreme example of that was the Seven Sisters schools. The women's colleges were extremely welcoming to women who then transitioned to be trans men. Ooh. I mean, these were safe spaces, which was an important thing at the time.
Because then you're going to have a man at a women's college.
That's right, and they allowed it, and they welcomed them, and they gave them
really
support.
Interesting.
Wait. Are these women's only colleges?
Yes, women like Smith.
Why would you allow a man, even if you're
you didn't allow a man? You allowed a woman. This woman applied, and then she decided to transition once she was at school.
Right, but then she was a man.
Didn't matter. They didn't kick her out. They said, "Okay, you're a man. You can stay and get your degree."
Okay, do you think that's right?
They wouldn't accept trans women.
Wait, but do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think that's fine. They can do that. The problem was,
I don't necessarily agree. Yeah.
Well, why would you kick somebody out of school? I mean, it's sort of like,
why would you have a women's only school to start with?
That's a whole different issue.
But I'm quite serious though. I think this bothers me because this reminds me, and this is Cliff, where I get to be outspoken, and you can be careful.
I'm just going to sit here.
I had noticed something a year ago, and I didn't realize that Andrew Sullivan, who we're both friends with, had written about it. But I noticed a year ago there are all these trans women on Grindr, which is basically a gay, dating. It's a gay hookup app, and it's a lot of trans women looking for guys. And I was looking at this going like, what? Why are these women on Grindr? And by the way, I don't want to hook up with a woman. And then somebody told me, oh God, Andrew wrote about that last week, and I ran into him in the park and mentioned it. But using that same logic, then we should have trans women on Grindr. And I argued with a very woke friend of mine who finally came around. He had no problem with it. I said, so would you want actual women on Grindr? I used the term, and he said, well, no, of course not. Oh, so you don't consider trans women actual women? They're actually less woman to you, and that's why it's okay. And he said,
putting the cans of worms by the many.
I'm saying I caught him, and he said, oh my God, I didn't think of it that way. But I caught that even for him, he was considering trans women to not quite be women, so it was okay.
That's right. And this is the problem.
That's why I bring this up.
The TERFs or the gender crits in the
Wait,
UK.
Tell me what a TERF is, because somebody had accused me of that the other day on, literally, we might have been talking about the Iraq War for all I know. And he goes, oh, but you're a TERF. And I went, and I had to Google
the
it.
Iraq War. How is one a TERF on the Iraq War?
It literally had nothing to do with any of these issues.
You can't be a TERF because you're male. TERF is a trans-exclusionary radical feminist.
Well, I told him, I said, I'm not even a radical feminist. What are you talking about?
Right. And they call them gender crits in England. And
also got mixed up between TERF and isolationist. They're very similar terms.
Well, see what happened in lesbian.
My joke didn't land.
And I watched this happen on school in real time. Is that a lot of the butch lesbians started to transition around the turn of the century.
Okay.
And a lot of women lost their partners. And they got very upset. Right. And that has continued. Right. Somebody just wrote
I know someone who did.
Blog, where there are only like 16 lesbian bars left in the country.
No, I know somebody whose partner did transition. And I mean, I give her kudos because I don't know what I would do because I'm not into women sexually, and that's
so this is a problem.
That would be really hard.
As civil human beings, but the lesbian community sort of lost its mind and blamed trans women for this.
For basically trying to eliminate lesbians in essence.
Yeah, well, they would say your partner here is a trans man, but he's not really a man. He's just he's a woman who misunderstands who he is.
Yeah.
And they would say that for the longest time. They would not accept the reality of their partners.
Right.
But rather than take it out on their partners, they took it out on trans women, sort of like the purveyors of transgender ideologies, the Vatican says. We're in a bunker in some undisclosed location somewhere, the World Trans Conspiracy, we're plotting this out.
Exactly.
Now, I know that that's not the case. Well, at least I've never been invited, so maybe I should be offended. The World Jewish Conspiracy is watching all of these other conspiracies. We haven't noticed the World Trans.
Look, all we do is plan the economy every year. We leave everything else out.
And you send us checks, and we very much appreciate it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's because we consider you acceptable. So we plan out the economy, and
George Soros is our,
Soros, a couple of Rothschilds, and me.
That's right. That's right. So the stuff gets very complicated, and I think you sort of alluded to it earlier. When you want to understand where TERFness comes from, why would JK Rowling be saying what?
But what is TERFness again? I'm sorry. What is it? You said the definition, not the definition. You said what the acronyms mean, but what is it literally? It means
it means that lesbians do not accept that trans
women are women. Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, and look, the lesbian community has been extremely varied too. There are gold star, 5-star lesbians who've never been with a man. There are many who have been. There are some who've had kids and then have gone back to lesbianhood and stuff. But even the term lesbian is rather archaic. Most gay women do not identify as lesbian.
What do they identify?
Gay.
Yeah. Oh, just really?
Gay? Okay.
Or queer. The younger ones identify as queer or non-binary. Okay. So it's sort of become a safe space for people who think that the old terms like gay or lesbian are tinged with, gender binary and rigid.
Could be closeted too, to a degree.
What?
Could be a little closeted too. I wonder.
Well, that's what remember the old earlier. You said this is a gay person who's saying he's a little bit this. Well, okay.
Well, he could be. No. I mean, he may or may not be, obviously. But his definition was absolutely the definition of gay as well. But I'm wondering also. Right, you could also. Dan Savage got in trouble for this too. But Dan's right. we all know some people kind of feel more comfortable calling themselves bi than gay, especially guys when they're first coming out, and then they kind of admit finally, okay, I'm gay. And I wonder too whether these terms, whether it's queer, whether it's non-binary or whatever, make it a little more comfortable for people. Because frankly, non-binary, you just kind of, anybody else, you kind of scratch your head and go, huh? You don't say, oh, gay.
Well, that's true. A lot of people, non-binary is chic, just the way they used to talk about trans being chic 7 years ago. Today, non-binary is chic, and all these cis women are coming out as non-binary.
But it protects you too, because nobody says non-binary, oh, that means you have sex with men. Whereas gay, first thing in their head is my sex life.
You look at somebody and you go, but then you don't get into it. You don't think about sex, because it's about gender. It's about presentation. There have always been non-conforming people. They used to call themselves androgynous. Or genderqueer, and it wasn't an identity.
Or senator, but we won't go there.
Oh, okay. But today the problem is identity is such an issue, right? Everybody has to have an identity, and we have this explosion of identities on Facebook and this and that, and it becomes a point of, comedy. Bill Maher would talk about this and stuff, and bring trans women on like Janet Mock, and she would lose her mind because he said LGBT instead of LGBTQIA.
She pulled that shit on what's his face, who's an idiot but was really good. That British idiot who used to be on TV here on CNN.
Piers Morgan?
Piers Morgan did it. I wrote about it. I was so pissed off. No, because, but you will appreciate whether, depending how you thought about the interview, but you'll appreciate my take. Piers Morgan fell in fucking love with Janet Mock. He had the hots for Janet Mock. He sat there an hour, or not an hour, maybe 20, 40 minutes, maybe it was 40 minutes. It was a good long segment. And he sat there, Janet, black transgender woman, very pretty. And Janet sat there talking, and Piers was literally like this. The only other time I've seen this was John McCain at a hearing when the woman who was Holly from General Hospital was testifying. And John McCain put his head down like this and just smiled and watched. I mean, Piers
I've seen that in legislatures too.
Piers was enthralled with her, and she nitpicked afterwards. She excoriated him. The entire community blew up. Things like the Chiron, which is the name at the bottom of the Chiron. I'm sorry, for our people though, it's that little script at the bottom of the screen. The Chiron at the bottom of the screen at one point said, Janet was born a man and changed or had sex change surgery to a woman or something like that at 18. Oh my God. He asked her, she had a book, autobiography. He asked her about her boyfriend. Now, mind you, to me, this is an obvious question. You're trans, whether you had surgery or not. Again, there's not even language for this, but his point was, your boyfriend was with a guy and now he's with a girl. How did that go for him? Oh my God. And mind you, it was in the fucking book. So even her, but she got outraged that he asked about her relationship. It was, but he couldn't have been nicer. And for me, exactly, I watched it twice because I was so pissed off. I wanted to write about it, make sure I got it right. He accepted her as a gorgeous woman and even had the hots for her as a woman, this big fat pig of a white man, of a straight man.
Who loves Donald Trump and is just gross in every way imaginable.
But to me, that was the epitome of trans acceptance on national television.
Right. Well, look, Bill Maher has the hots for Caitlyn Jenner. He can't get over
Does he really?
Yeah. He always brings her up. He's always, when he's transphobic with relation to her because it makes him uncomfortable that he finds her attractive.
Oh, that's
and I've watched.
So it's like when I was in kindergarten and I hit a girl because I was attracted to her, kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. So but this brings back the question you mentioned at the beginning. Some people, when they get an opportunity like the one Janet had.
Right.
Both with Maher and with
I didn't know about the Maher thing. Yeah.
Has to be in a mind space where she can actually present this better to people who don't have a clue who she is or what she's doing. Bingo. Now, the Chiron was wrong. The Chiron was archaic. Whoever was doing this, like the person who writes, the headline in a paper or a caption. These are different people than the reporters.
Yeah.
Most people don't know that, but they
don't.
They need to get that better. It can't.
How many of us who've ever written articles have gotten reamed because the headline to the article was not we didn't choose it, and Cliff, it wasn't good, and then we get destroyed for it.
But I even had a hard time explaining the damn Chiron, because as I was explaining it, I was going, "Oh fuck, I'm going to get this wrong, and people are going to get pissed at me." This stuff is not easy, and what you've got to recognize is, it's not easy. People are going to screw up, but it doesn't mean they're bad people. You don't blow up at them.
It doesn't mean they come with bad faith. It means that if you're in your little bubble where everybody understands everything, even you have to understand that people outside of that bubble who don't encounter these issues every day, don't talk about them every day, and many of whom are coming in good faith and trying to be better people.
And that's every issue. And that's every issue.
That's what I'm saying. It is every issue.
It's every issue. And when you're 0.6% of the population, you simply need to understand that that's the vast majority of people.
Stop. Let me ask you then. And I don't want people to get pissed that I'm cutting her off, but I've got my questions too. With 0.6%. Oh yeah. One of the big fights I have with activists, young activists, and I especially had this on the trans thing, again, Janet Mock and all that, was, it's not our job to educate you people. And I'm like, it's 99% of your fucking job. What are you talking about? That I went on TV all the time. It was my job to fucking explain to people that I wasn't a goddamn pedophile. And again, if the religious right guy brought it up, I would destroy him. But even when nice straight people brought it up, I was like, well, the studies show that was a canard that was created by the religious right. But you had to explain it to people so that normal people out there went, oh, I didn't know that.
And it takes time. It takes decades to do that.
But have you noticed this with younger activists?
Yes, they don't want to do it. They're already bored.
Yeah. And they think it's offensive. And I'm like,
and they're right.
And lose.
Look,
of course it's offensive. So is civil rights.
They should be able to get on with their lives and not have to explain to anybody.
We shouldn't have to be civil rights activists.
I know.
Of course not.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And it's unfortunate.
You shouldn't, but I mean, it's kind of like, again, to make this more broad, that's every fight we've ever engaged in.
And you know what? You shouldn't have to be a climate activist, Cliff.
We shouldn't have had to, we shouldn't have to educate people on the climate or the dangerousness of guns or the fact that all people are equal no matter the color of their skin. But what we should have to do in that nice, wonderful, perfect world versus the one we live in are two very different things.
Yeah, if you want to win and you want to make change.
Right. Bayard Rustin said, remember, this is it's a cliche already. You're not going to convince 20% of the people. 20% are on your side. You've got to go to the movable middle.
Right. Exactly.
And that is tens of millions of people.
Right.
It's the political definition of triage. Ignore the ones you're not gonna be able to do.
You know they're malevolent. If they're malicious, there's no point in wasting your time with them.
Right.
But if they're not, if they misgender you inadvertently, don't chew their ear off. Right.
It's an education opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I will tell you, especially when you're scared of the public repercussions, and there are, as we all know, in culture right now, what you do if you're somebody like me, and this hasn't happened recently, thankfully, but if you try to reach out and somebody jumps on you publicly and essentially calls you a bigot just because you want to understand and be helpful, what you're going to do is you're going to clam up and walk away.
You don't talk about the issues at all.
I'm not even engaging in this anymore because I still have to make a living for my family. And if somebody attacks me in a way that makes me, toxic to the publications I write for or the shows I appear on, then you know what? I'd rather just ignore the whole topic. Right. And that's dangerous. I mean, then you're losing a potential ally. It's stupid.
I've done that too. There were times when it just wasn't worth making an issue about it. And you don't have to fight every battle, right? You have to pick your fights.
Right.
And you hope you do it in a way that will get to the most people.
Hey,
but the world has changed over the past 25 years since I started doing this.
I want to ask you about the
pronoun. Oh my God, hugely, yeah. I want to ask you about, only say this quickly from the perspective. I've said that I'll let you go, John. I just want to say from the perspective of what my kids watch on TV, that is the best way to see how much the world has changed. I mean, the things that they're seeing on TV, they watch some of the sort of, we brought up Star Trek before, so why not bring up like The Flash now and stuff like that. They've got a transgender character. They've got interracial relationships. They've got one interracial lesbian, gay relationship. They've got all of these things, and it's like, this is just normal to my kids, and I love it because
there wasn't sort of like a Batman spin-off where the lead character, like Batwoman, is a Jewish lesbian or something.
Yep, exactly right.
Okay, stuff like that. I mean, I'm a little too old for that now, but look, we discovered in the 32nd century that there's one trans person and one non-binary person. So we have managed to survive like 12,
and a handful of black
1,200
people.
years, right? It may only be one of each, but still.
I'm just saying they see this stuff regularly, you know, and I used to give shout outs. My kids are too old now, but there's a cartoon on called The Loud House about this big family that lives in Michigan, which makes it even better.
Oh, the Louds? The Louds were the first PBS back in 1973. The Louds had the first gay character, openly gay character on TV.
Oh, I didn't know. So this is a cartoon. So this comes from back then? Is this right?
I would assume so. The Louds on PBS in 1973 was the first family that had an openly gay kid on it.
Well, it's great because I didn't know that. And this cartoon, like these, you know, like one of the there's a bunch of kids. One of the daughter is, one of the sisters is, you know, of the main character is gay. It's completely open and accepted, but also his best friend's African American and has two dads. And like the fact that my kids, you know, at the ages of, they're now 14 and 11, but at the ages of sort of 8 and 5, were watching that, my two boys, was awesome because there's that much less because they came to they're like, people are people and they don't even get why anybody would discriminate.
Well, remember when Sasha and Malia told their father, like, come on, Dad, a lot of our friends have, you know, gay parents. It's it's about time. And you know, so the difference from my childhood when Kirk and Uhura kissed in the first interracial
that was the first
TV,
that's right. That was a big deal.
Notice it wasn't a voluntary kiss. Exactly. There was no, they didn't sit down and do, this wasn't consensual sex.
No, it was forced by aliens who controlled them. But the thing is that's the brilliance of Roddenberry is he used that to get it, to make it okay and make it happen.
He had to use that in order to get it on. If they had just decided, you know, Uhuru, I really, Nyata, he should have called her by her first name. You're really attractive. I'm going to kiss you. That would never have flown, right?
No.
It had to be a forced alien force.
You're right. But I do give him credit that he found a way to work that in there.
That's right. Because that was his mission, really. That was the true mission.
All right, let me ask you about the question about the pronoun thing.
Okay.
Something, and this may be geeky, not geeky, but I have been very disturbed by the movement for people to put their pronouns in their emails and things like that.
Yeah.
And here's what worries me.
I'm disturbed by it too.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, because I worry about it from an outing perspective, because I was looking at it and I saw people in workplaces doing this and I thought, oh my God. And I thought of that friend of mine who confessed to me, God, it was the 1990s and he's still male, whatever that means. He never
still presenting as a man.
Okay, there you go. Still presenting as a man. He never came to terms with being
what. That's why I said most trans
woman,
people
right?
are still closeted.
Right. And super closeted. Obviously, like he's just not going to go there. Right. And I imagine an office place where it is the expected custom. I was at a meeting, LGBT networking meeting. And we went around the room at the beginning and people started telling who they were and their pronouns.
Right. I call it the pronoun circle jerk.
Well, and I think because I heard that and I thought, holy shit, I'm supposed to publicly say right now whether I'm trans or not. How the fuck dare you?
Well, a lot of people
How fucking dare you? And even then in a workplace, it gets even better. This group too. I refuse to say my pronouns. A, people now think I'm closet trans. B, they think I'm a fucking bigot because I don't want to.
No, you're right. It's true.
So in a work environment, you either are forced to come out as trans or not. B, you're forced to not agree at all to do it, and then people just assume you're a fucking bigot when frankly you could just be closeted. But I thought it is the most offensive. It's outing. And I think, and frankly, as a lawyer too, boy, are you setting yourself up for a great fucking lawsuit that you're making people go around the office.
I get the point of it. You're trying to breed acceptance among people. But at the same time, if there are people there that are never going to accept somebody and you're forcing someone to out themselves, you may be actually creating a negative to dangerous situation for them.
What do you, Dana, what do you think?
Well, oftentimes it's only one person in a workplace who's a real bigot and causes that trouble and goes to court and all of that. I've spoken to enough companies where there was, well, we needed to bring you in here because we have an employee who's transitioning, and I know somebody in that department over there is really unhappy about this. It's one person. It's not like the entire employee base is up in arms about this. It's usually one person.
Can I ask quickly though? I mean, is most of the work you're doing, I mean, you're in Maryland, right?
Yeah. No, I don't do much of this anymore. But
so
that was
my concern is, what if you're in, let's say, Oklahoma, and a rural part of it, it might be more than one person, is what I'm saying.
It
right?
might be, but I think, look, the studies have been done. I mean, this polling went on for decades, and we would ask, should there be anti-discrimination laws protecting gay and trans people? And back like 10 years ago, 50% of the population said yes. But, even as long ago as 5 or 6 years ago, it was 75% said we should not discriminate against gay and trans Americans. And when asked, when they dove down occasionally, people would say, aren't they protected already? Why would anybody discriminate against them, right? So
discrimination is illegal.
Well, but
that's the toughest ones when people don't, we didn't talk about it at the beginning, but John it would tell you I've done a lot of work on gun issues. And it's the same, it's not exactly the same thing, but we go to people and be like, you should have background checks to make sure people who are criminals and terrorists and this and that aren't buying guns. Like, well, those already exist. And we're like, actually, I have something interesting to tell you. In most states, or at least at this point, over half the states, they do not, know?
All right, but
go ahead, sorry.
My point is that Americans generally don't want to discriminate.
Right.
And they do live and let live for the most part. And if, again, in a workplace, if you're not forcing somebody to come out and say, hi, everybody, I'm trans, these are my pronouns, you're not putting a target on their back. They'll be able to do their job and then come out slowly, and people will get to know them. And that's how change happens in the country.
Exactly.
I think the problem with those circles and stuff is that it's become with this generation, it's about me. I need to be the one, as I said, pregnant women, my God. So there are what? 10 million pregnant women in this country and 24 pregnant trans men. And we should change the language to placate the 24 trans men and forget about all the women. I mean, to me, I would take that to be offensive. I think that's where a lot of the back.
Do people hate you?
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I don't usually talk about this publicly.
Okay, this is why I like Dana.
You seem very charming.
Because we had a really long conversation about this stuff again back in the 2000s, a long time ago, and I was so impressed because Dana is not considered some radical whatever hater. I don't know what you want to call it, but. I'm just surprised that do you not get a lot of shit for saying that kind of stuff? Because I would think people would get pissed.
No, actually, for some reason, people really don't go after me. I don't know why.
Oh, you're lucky, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, at some point, you have to make a decision whether you're going to speak your mind.
No, but it does. But you're right.
It's not like I'm going out and proselytizing people.
You know what it feels like to me? To me, it feels like all those white people on Twitter who have to be blacker than black.
Yeah.
And there have been articles about this. And the same thing.
I don't understand. As I said to Cliff, I said Planned Parenthood is extremely inclusive. And I understand why trans men at various spots in this country are uncomfortable walking into a gynecologist's office.
Right.
I mean, I get that. It's tough being trans. But you need to develop a thicker skin and get in there and do it and use your presence to educate the staff, the medical personnel, and your fellow, patients.
It's hard
about what it's like to be a pregnant trans man. Yeah. Don't take that as a burden. Don't put that on everybody else and say, oh, we were talking about the Seven Sisters. So the Seven Sisters schools would not admit trans women who had transitioned before application.
Oh, wait. So women's schools wouldn't accept trans women?
Right. That's changed. In the past 5 we got that changed. But at the beginning, they allowed trans men to transition in their schools and to stay, but they wouldn't admit trans women.
Right.
And then
I would have thought it would have gone in the opposite direction.
That's right. You would think so, but no. So, but then the trans men had the chutzpah to say, you can't call yourself the Seven Sisters. You have to call yourself the Seven Siblings. You have to talk about siblinghood instead of sisterhood.
Oh, God.
These are the things that drive me and John crazy all the time.
That's right. But that's like, these people are reaching out to you. They're embracing you. They're not only accepting you, they're affirming you.
Right. Don't
then go ahead and spit on them and say, you haven't gone far enough. And when it comes to pronouns, you're right. There's already a backlash to that, though it's interesting. So to me, my pet peeve is the plural singular, which is completely arbitrary and provocative. And I think it's just...
In other words, people wanting to be referred to as they?
Yes, and we is not happy with that, and we is not going to accept that.
Well, can I tell you, my bigger pet peeve is Zer or whatever.
Well, no, but see, no. So I've been involved watching the way this has evolved.
Right.
And when you go to clinics, large gender clinics, particularly with kids, and you ask them, how do you identify? There are like 70 different, you were talking about that one gay guy who was identifying that there are demi boys and semi girls. And there's this proliferation of identities, but they all fall under, say, gender queer. Okay. And the pronouns, they're her and zir and zir.
Yeah.
In Sweden, which is a very homogeneous country for the most part, they created a gender neutral pronoun. It's hen, H-E-N, which is similar to their he and she.
Okay.
And that's it. That's the end of it. They created a new pronoun.
Wouldn't that be much easier? Like, I'm sorry. I know maybe I shouldn't even be talking out loud and should let you guys discuss it. But I mean, for me, again, it's going to be much easier if you can actually know what that is. You've got that one gender neutral one so that I can talk to someone and treat them respectfully and refer them. Whereas I can't learn 55 different.
That's the point. You can't sit around a circle and remember everybody's name, even if it's a dozen people, let alone their pronouns.
I can't even remember what I have on the shopping list most of the time.
That's right. It's very impractical. Our brains can only hold 7 pieces of data in our minds at any one time. So that, from a practical purpose, it's silly. But the Swedes, again, they could do that. The French have an alliance française, whatever they dictate, whatever it's going to be. That makes it easier. Here, they decided because there is an impersonal plural singular where you say they, because you don't know what the gender is and stuff, we can apply that to us as people. And suddenly you screwed up the grammar, you give people headaches. It's unreadable stuff. Now, it's been interesting. There hasn't been a huge public backlash about this, but the people that I watched who said, I want to be called they, this is my preferred pronoun, now called personal pronoun, not preferred, it's this is my pronoun, are now saying they or he, they or she.
Oh, I saw that. I saw that yesterday.
So when Elliot Page came out,
can tell you, I saw somebody yesterday that had she/they, and I Googled it and couldn't.
No, Elliot Page came out. Elliot transitioned, apparently. I don't know. When Elliot wrote this little statement about his transition, changing his name, he said he's trans, non-binary, and queer. This is the problem that we have now. If you're in that bubble, that millennial Gen Z bubble, you might understand that has a certain meaning to you. But it has no meaning to everybody else out there because trans
feels like a math equation I can't figure
which is not queer. And that's the problem. People are not specific about it. So today,
and how are you trans non-binary? How does that even work?
I could, as a trans woman, decide for political purposes, I want to identify as non-binary. I'm still a trans woman. I transitioned from male to female as the language that we use, and now I'm non-binary.
No,
but non-binary by definition does not equate to trans.
Right, but you didn't. But no, you didn't, because if
I know it didn't exist.
Devil's advocate here. If you are non-binary, you just figured out you were non-binary, but you were always non-binary. Let's think of the language we all use, right?
Look, let's be clear. Non-binary.
That's how gay and trans works.
Non-binary refers to gender, and trans refers to sex. That's the point I've been trying to make. As a scientist, I've been teaching this for a very, very long time. This whole non-binary thing is a gender thing. You want to smash the gender binary. The problem is a lot of non-binary people will not acknowledge that they have a sex. And this is what infuriates Andrew and that provokes the JK Rowlings of the world to say, what do you mean sex is not real? There are non-binary people who say sex is not real. They
meaning like your physical.
Man, they're not right. There's no male or female sex. It's a meaningless concept, or it's a social construct which they reject. That's absolute nonsense. They're denying reality.
Well, but again, I'm sorry, but I got to get you to the language. So when you're saying sex, you mean the person's physically my body's
their
sex
genes,
is
their
male,
chromosomes, their brain sex, their hormones, yada yada yada.
But in gender and identity means in my head I know I'm man, or in my head you knew you were a woman. That's not sex.
Brain sex. It really should be not gender identity. It should be sexual identity. But this is how language evolves. Because we got rid of sex in the 90s, we went with gender identity because nobody had it. And gay people were talking about sexual orientation. So we went to gender identity. But it's sexual identity, really.
Okay.
You know whether you're male or female. There is a fly that's used in research called Drosophila, the fruit fly.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
Right. And they discovered about, I don't know, I think it's 12 years ago now, a gene called fruitless gene. Very funny, whoever the researchers were, probably gay guys. And they called it fruitless. And you can flip it on or off. And if you flip it on, it's male. And if you flip it off, it's female. And I remember when the story came out, they said, they found the gene for sexual orientation in a fruit fly. And I said, no, it's not for sexual orientation. It's the gender identity. It's the sexual identity of that fly. The fly either sees itself as male or as female. If it's male, it behaves in a male way towards a female. If it's female, it behaves in a female way to a male. If you then flip it and see a female mate with another female, that's sexual orientation. But that's so okay.
Oh God!
You can see how complicated this gets.
Even for me, I'm kind of going.
I know. But the problem is, so when
take us back to the JK Rowling thing then.
But when Elliot Page comes out and says, "I'm trans, I'm non-binary, and I'm queer,"
and this is the actress now.
Actor.
I think
well,
actor now. Wait, which?
We don't use.
Oh, that's true. Actor is a no. But what I meant was. I just read about this the other day. This was somebody who I'm gonna find. You can't talk about this stuff.
Yes, you can. You can say Elliot Page lived as a woman and was acting as a woman.
Okay, there you go.
But has known for years.
In what this was in what movie? This was in what movie? This was
Juno was the
Juno,
was the famous one.
Who now has
transitioned to male.
Okay.
Now changed the name from Ellen to Elliot and identified.
This is the one who was an actor. A woman in Juno has now transitioned to, okay, just making sure I got it.
Now there's a backstory to this, and I don't know Paige well, but I do know Paige visited gender clinics 5 years ago.
Right.
So this is nothing new for this person, okay?
Right.
Elliot knew.
Right.
But Elliot
came out as lesbian years ago as well, first.
Right. Yeah. So this is a typical former cis lesbian, butch cis lesbian, or sort of soft femme, soft butch, you can go back and look at it. And, the lesbian community has this spectrum of behaviors. And you'd look and you'd go, oh, that's interesting. This is probably a lesbian. And now this is a trans man. Right. But also identifying as non-binary and also identifying as queer. Now, I don't know if Elliot's going to go through hormonal reassignment or surgical reassignment. That would be what a trans person would do. Non-binary people don't do that necessarily.
Yeah.
So, if you're non-binary, it's just about gender. You don't have to change your sex. You can keep your genitals, you can keep your hormones, and you can just identify as non-binary and present androgynously.
I feel like I've learned a lot from this, but I also have now like so many more questions and things I don't understand.
And that's fine. And then you have debates and discussions about it, and you can't do it on Twitter because the JK Rowling thing started, well, at least when I
tell people what that is.
So
I don't even totally understand what
obviously because of who she is, suddenly everybody pays attention. I'll say this, I don't think American queer people should pay that much attention to what goes on in Britain, first off. That country's run by Bojo the Clown. The Russians perverted their political system and threw them out of the European Union. Don't pay attention to their stuff. Forget it. But they do because it's Twitter and it's global. Okay.
Right.
So, Jake, there was some sort of an incident.
We can kind of make that argument about America, though, too, couldn't we?
And I'm just trying to be specific here because this has been the sort of the spark that's lit this problem.
Yeah.
And then the Harper's story, with the signatures and all that.
And I was totally fine with that Harper's letter. But of course, I'm an asshole.
Well, I wasn't because I wasn't invited to sign it. But that's
Thank you. I wanted to sign it too. But look at this is why I like you.
And I would have agreed with that letter also.
But this is why we're doing this. Because we would not be where we are today in 2020 with Bostock and Obergefell and all of that without free speech, without the gay and trans communities getting out there, demonstrating, free assembly, and all of that stuff, and talking to people person to person and group to group and all that. We never would have been where we are today. We wouldn't have gotten here.
Right.
So how can we then go out and shut down people from talking? Now, I do have
that's exactly why that's a perfect.
Oliver Wendell Holmes had a red line. You cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. To me, the red line is with Nazis. My people, Cliff, your people, we've never had signed a peace treaty with Nazis. As far as I'm concerned, they're fair game. But anything short of that.
How about Jordan Peterson's book?
Jordan Peterson's a very sad character. I don't think you know what's happened to him. He's very sick, and
isn't he? I thought he was in like a coma at this point.
Oh,
yeah,
is he
he's
really?
in a coma now. His daughter took advantage of him. I don't know what it is.
Oh.
Jordan Peterson said something too. I remember when he was becoming the incel's favorite person, and suddenly the trans community heard about him, and I tried to look up, well, what did he say that was so offensive? And the only thing I came upon, and I didn't listen to his lectures.
Look at you looking for facts.
He did hundreds of these talks, and I wasn't going to listen to him.
Yeah.
That's not my job.
I don't know much about him either. Yeah.
I came across one where he said, okay, I will, out of respect, use the pronouns that you prefer, but you can't make me do that. I have the freedom not to do that. And I thought, why is that offensive? To me, that's not offensive. Yeah, you cannot control people's speech. You need to go out. We were talking. You need to talk to people and explain to them who you are, and then they will treat you with respect. Don't make it difficult.
But can I devil's advocate you though?
Language with crazy pronouns.
But let me devil's advocate you though. I would certainly be pissed off if I were married and someone said, you know what, in my workplace, I'm not going to refer to your husband as your husband because he's not a girl. I'd be pissed.
But you have a thick enough skin that you go, this person doesn't matter. I don't
know. I might come after him, to be honest. I mean, I don't know. I might try to file a complaint.
All right.
Ironically, that would piss me off. But go on.
See, that's the whole thing, John, and this is where I'm
hard
with
to
Dana,
know.
which is my whole thing is with most of these folks. Why I believe in free speech on this is just what do I care what you say if you're a bigot or an idiot? You know what I mean? Like I want to educate people who we can educate about good things, and obviously. And I've said this a lot on this show. It's funny that you brought up the Oliver Wendell Holmes and the rest. To me, where we don't regulate speech enough is with violent rhetoric, with rhetoric encouraging terrorism and these things that's on Fox News and Rush Limbaugh every day, where we can see stochastic terrorism and we can see the results of this kind of rhetoric and what it leads people to. That's the stuff we should be regulating.
Right, or the algorithms that drive people to the hate groups with Facebook.
Exactly.
Right? That's the problem, and we need to deal with that. And I suggest,
but not this stuff. If I don't call you the right thing, or I don't understand this, I mean, we should be able to have these open conversations on campuses, in workplaces, and without people fearing they may say the wrong damn thing by mistake.
Yeah, campuses should not be safe spaces. The general application for college should have a trigger warning at the top.
Yeah,
college is not a safe.
You are going to learn.
You're going to be exposed to a lot of stuff that you're not happy with.
It should just have a subtitle that says, lots of bad shit has happened in history. You still have to learn about it.
Yeah. Right.
Wait, so, JK Rowling. So get us back to JK Rowling.
Okay. But Peterson was a good example of that. And I was like, okay, there's nothing wrong with what he said there. Now, the problem with JK Rowling was when I first noticed what she said, sex is real. That was basically the tweet.
Okay.
And I go, well, of course sex is real.
Right.
Based on what I've been talking about for an hour and a half, you'd go, yeah, I think Dana would agree that sex is real. But a lot of non-binary people don't believe that to be so.
And what does that even mean, sex is real? Again, sex meaning...
sex, that you are
physically male, physically female? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of who you are.
Okay.
I think if non-binary evolved to the point where somebody like, I won't use Paige because I think Paige is actually transitioning, but somebody else who's living as a cis female and comes out saying, I am non-binary, and says, I am a female non-binary person. Female is the sex, non-binary is the gender.
Okay. Right.
That explains it. There's no argument. When
I see what you mean. Okay, I see what you mean.
There was a woman here. I've been dealing with TERFs in Maryland for a long time, and there was a woman that was on the Board of Equality Maryland.
Isn't that like the sports team there or something?
What?
Isn't it the Maryland? No, what's it? Maryland Terps or something? What's the
Maryland Terps? Right, the Ravens.
The Terps.
Oh, the Terps.
You're thinking of the University of Maryland team.
I'm a gay guy. I don't do sports.
That's hilarious. That may have to be the name of our podcast.
That's actually very funny. I knew it was something close.
Right. So there was anyway. That's good. So then my son
I'm laughing so hard.
My younger son went to College Park, so he was a Terp. But so I was the token trans person on the Equality Maryland board,
right?
And this woman was the token black person, and so we would sort of commiserate with one another, being these outsiders. And after about 4 or 5 years, she became a TERF. And when I asked her, because we were still friends, I said, what does this mean to you? Please explain it to me. Let's have a conversation here. What does it mean? How do you define your sex and your gender? And she said, I'm a female homosexual born female. And I went, well, that's interesting. Okay. I think you're sort of stretching the definition a little bit here, but okay. 2 years later, she transitioned. And she's now a very happy trans man. Okay. Right. He's very happy the way he is. Right. And it's sort of like that was the progress, that was the path he had to take. Right. And getting there was very complicated because you're part of a community. You don't want to offend that community. Back in the aughts, when I was working on relationship recognition and on the school board here in Montgomery County, there was one guy who was the leader of the right wing, one of the leaders of the right wing group, Wayne Throckmorton, who was very intelligent guy.
I know that name, yeah.
Okay, very nice guy.
Yeah.
And he would tell us privately that, I really agree with what you're doing here. But because I'm part of this church community and part of this political community, I have to do, this is my job. I had like a lawyer saying, I have to defend Donald Trump because I'm a lawyer and I'm getting paid. Of course, they're not getting paid, but whatever.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
That's the job. And that's sort of what happened with Blankenship at Prop 8, where, he was this right-wing lunatic and he had to go to court and speak under oath. And he went, maybe you guys are right. I think I'm going to join your team now. Right. So, but we had that relationship, but he explained to us that the peer group pressure was intense. So if you were a lesbian woman in 2008 or something, it would have been really hard for you to accept yourself as a trans man and come out to your partners and to your community and then take that step. Right. And because of all the work that you and I have done over the past 25 years, roughly, when it's been a nationalized thing, we really changed the world so people like that could do it and come to peace with themselves.
Right.
And I think you're going to see that with non-binary people, because in the past being like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, it was, I want you to use they, and if you don't use they, then you're a bigot, and I'm going to call you he and stuff. How could you do that to me, Dana? How could you not be understand? And I would go, because you're being provocative and arbitrary. Right. You didn't ask me if this was okay. You didn't sit down. We didn't have a convening. The trans community didn't get together and ask, do we want to welcome non-binary people in? Is it going to change our mission? Is it going to change our understanding of ourselves? Because they're two totally different phenomena. We didn't do that, and it just sort of evolved organically.
See, and this is my issue with adding all the different letters onto LGBTQIA plus blah blah blah.
And it is a problem because it becomes a mouthful, and people don't understand.
Well, but also, who voted to let 10 more communities into our group as equivalent?
There's no king or queen anywhere here, so that's why.
Well, but it's just like Latinx. It is done by fiat, and that's my problem.
I know, and it doesn't help politically. Most Latinx people don't know what the fuck it is.
2%, 2 to 3% of Latinos use Latinx. I know a lot of Latinos who go, what? A friend of mine was at a meeting and he got pissed that somebody even used the term. He was like, I'm not Latin. Somebody referred to him as Latinx. He goes, I'm not Latinx. I'm Latino. I'm Hispanic. My family's Mexican. I mean, and on LGBT stuff, we've had the same thing.
But that's why it's become queer. But John, that's why queer.
Yeah, but
Q has evolved, so we don't need the alphabets.
But let me tell you my problem with queer, real quick. And Cliff, you'll appreciate this too.
I get it. I understand.
No. I don't think you do get it, because this is something very particular in the last couple of days. HRC, Human Rights Campaign, not Hillary Clinton. We love both. One of the biggest LGBT rights groups. HRC puts out a press release congratulating Karine Jean-Pierre and this other woman whose name I can't remember, starts with a W maybe. I never knew.
Polar?
I don't know. I didn't know. I wasn't even familiar with who the other person was.
The key about Karine Jean-Pierre, though, is that she's a SEPA grad.
There you go.
Sorry, that was that was my grad school, so I had to be proud of her.
But it was, so Karine Jean-Pierre, you guys would have seen her on CNN a lot.
Sure, of course.
Former,
she's the one who
we all know who she is.
Well, no, for the audience though.
She slammed that person who came up during the debate. To protect,
I didn't remember. She's amazing.
Kamala Harris
beautiful black woman, Haitian background, I believe, brilliant, incredibly well spoken. I mean, so that it's not surprised she's, I believe, now going to be the deputy press secretary for Biden. Right. I mean, like Jem Psaki, who's the press secretary, so well spoken on TV. I wish I spoke English like she does. So amazing. So anyway, HRC puts out the release and says, congratulations, 2 queer women of color. And there wasn't any more detail in the release. Now, I only learned a couple of weeks ago that Karine was lesbian. I had no fucking clue she was lesbian, period, which means a lot of Americans don't know that either. The other person, I don't even know who they are. They could be bi, they could be trans, they could be one of these other categories getting added onto the list now. I have no idea. And what bothers me is by calling them queer women of color, you have inned them in terms of their visibility for the community. Because, and I use trans as an example, even though I'm not trans, because I think for you guys, there's less visibility than for us right now. I'm gay, certainly, right? If I'm a young trans person and I see a lesbian out there, that's great. That is not trans visibility. That is not telling me trans is okay because there's a lesbian there. That's great that there's a lesbian there, but for us to say that queer is this overarching thing and now we have no idea if those 2 women are gay, trans, or what, that you have lost an aspect of visibility for those subsets of the community, bisexual, whatever. And I think
You're
that really
right.
sucks.
No, I agree with you. And I've heard a lot of
That's what bothers
my gay friends who go, you know, what happened to gay, right?
Yeah.
And the lesbians are complaining what happened to lesbian.
Oh, wait, I had a niece, by the way, I had a niece that came out to me last Christmas, this Christmas that was safe. And she came out to me, she goes, oh, Uncle John, I didn't tell you, I'm queer. And literally, I kind of went, okay, what do you mean? And she goes, oh, I'm bi. And I said, oh, okay. But even that discussion, I went, I don't know what that means.
Well, like I'm telling you, the younger, the Gen Zs and stuff use queer as a catch-all because they don't want to be too defined by it. And, you know, okay, if that's how it's evolving, part of the problem, say that people complain about non-binary is if you do eradicate, you erase the gender binary, there are no more gay people, right? And there are no more trans people.
Right.
Because you have to transition from one sex to another, or you have to have sex with somebody of the same sex. And if there are no sexes and there's no gender, then that all disappears. And a lot of people, like you just explained, go, why are you erasing my life? I spent my entire life fighting for these rights, and now you're just taking an eraser.
My life experience no longer matters, which is a real buzzword on the woke left. Don't you deny my life experience?
Well, look, you know, one of the ironies is, I mean, the 2 post-structuralist theories that are prominent in academia now are critical race theory and queer theory, right?
Yeah.
And the whole non-binary comes from queer theory, and intersectionality comes from critical race theory, although intersectionality is just like Cliff and I being, you know, perceived white, Jewish.
It's obvious.
You know, he's straight. But
it's obvious.
I'm gay. He's cis. I'm trans. Whatever. But it's been twisted and manipulated, right?
Yeah.
And that's a problem for a lot of people. Some of this stuff, you're right. It gets confusing. And I one thing that really triggered Andrew when I was talking to him, it goes, some people say, I'm an LGBT person. And he goes, how the hell can I be an LGBT person? And people use that. At least HRC said queer. What if they said, congratulations to the 2 LGBT persons in the Biden administration? Yeah. You can't be an LGBT person. You can't be lesbian and gay and bi and trans, right?
That's a lot of stuff. I'm
lesbian,
could maybe, but
trans. I'm LGBT, but I can't be gay.
I guess if you're non-binary, you could be lesbian and gay, maybe. I don't know, but it's,
no, but it doesn't mean anything. It loses its meaning and such. And so the language gets, so now as a scientist, I would say to you, if non-binary is part of the trans community, and I was trying to do research on trans people, and I invited non-binary people in, I wouldn't be able to make any sense out of whatever data came out of my experiment.
Right.
Because they're 2 totally different concepts.
Right.
Not that one concept is better than the others or more real or more valid. It's just different.
So did JK Rowling fuck up or what? Did JK Rowling screw up or what?
Well, her problem is she sort of outed herself.
In the sense?
So in her comment that sex is real, she was referring to another woman whose contract wasn't renewed because she had said something like sex is real in the context of trans. This is the problem. And Rowling said, of course, sex is real. And I agreed. I said, so what's the big fuss here about this?
Right.
And then like 3 weeks later, she wrote a manifesto. Well, I think she called it a manifesto, literally.
Yeah, I read that. It was long.
Explaining what she meant by all of that. and she came out as a TERF. She basically came out as a transphobic bigot.
Okay, that she doesn't.
Even though she had been tweeting, I love trans people, trans women should be able to do whatever, this, and that.
Right.
And then she comes out and she's spewing all the crap that the right wing has been spewing at trans people, like I described to you earlier, about the desistance, that, you know, trans girls are going to go back to being cis boys, and so we shouldn't allow them to go on puberty blockers, yada, 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 yada.
Right.
So I'd like to believe, and this is my optimistic side, that she believes all that because she doesn't know any better. And my argument to people on my side was, rather than just deplatforming her, condemning her, not buying her books or whatever, and I will say that my younger son actually developed a love of reading thanks to Harry Potter, and so I owe her something.
Right.
I would love to debate her.
Right. Or educate her privately.
Floor with her. You could wipe the floor with her.
How about educate her privately? Even better.
Yeah, no, but whatever.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of this, people. We've won. We have the science on our side. We have history on our side. We have the Declaration of Independence and freedom and equality on our side. Don't let these people beat you down. Stop complaining about this. Stand up and go, no, you're wrong. Let me explain to you why you're wrong. Right. I think somebody like that can be brought along and educated. I don't think
there's a good chance.
I suspect.
No, I mean that's where Twitter becomes a problem, because everybody's just.
You can't in 240 characters. How do you explain this?
Well, that's part of it. It's also all the people on Twitter who assume that anytime you say anything, it's meant in bad faith. Now, sometimes with some people it may be, but often it's not.
Well, no, but I think they come from
by association. If you sign the Harper's letter, 3 trans women signed it, and 2 of them basically recanted because they saw that Rowling was on there later.
Oh, God. Well, yeah, but that whole thing, I mean, Gloria Steinem was on that letter. I was like, people, Gloria Steinem is not a sellout. I got news for you. You're here today because of Gloria Steinem. We're all here today because of Gloria Steinem.
And Gloria Steinem came a long way on trans issues. She was a bit bigoted early on, but she learned. Somebody talked to her.
Gotta educate people on all our issues.
Look, Barney was not an ally. Barney had to be educated.
But
it
everybody
took me and others 4 years to get him on board, but we did. And you know what?
And I think that is.
I get a lot more satisfaction out of flipping somebody like that than somebody who was there.
Right, and I think people take things, and I get it. If it's your identity, who you are, the core of what makes you you. I'm not talking about you specifically. One, why people take it personally, and then they get into this war sort of footing. But what people have to understand is when you're working on any political issue. And I get this all the time, and of course, Twitter, places like that, when I say, the classic example, this guy who was the voting implementation guy, Gabriel Sterling, whatever, who spoke out the other day. We need, and of course, you expect it when you say this is what needs to be said, and this person
the guy
has more courage.
The Republican in Georgia who spoke out about Trump inciting violence. Right.
Yes, and that saying this guy has more courage. I think I picked a couple senators, the one from this state, big coward Rob Portman and Marco Rubio and all these cowards put together, and here's this guy who doesn't have a national profile and is still willing to come out and say it, and you expect you're going to get some of those attacks from people on the left who are like, I don't care, they're all evil, he was a Republican, he was okay with Trump until now, and blah, 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 blah. And you try to explain to them, you have to take the personal away from it and say, if you want to win on some level, you need to be able to accept allies when they come to you. And say, okay, this person wasn't perfect and whatever, and I have to judge like everybody else. If somebody has done a lot of damage and they're now sort of weakly supporting you, maybe that isn't enough. But in his case, when you give a statement like that, to me, that's something that we need on our side. And I feel like a lot of people come to issues, no matter what they are, with anybody who's now is now saying the right thing. Well, I mean, you put it in the wrong language, or you weren't there 2 years ago, or and they just find a way to attack, and as opposed to trying to convert people, trying to bring them over, and it's insanity.
Remember
it's not the way you win.
Remember Anonymous, who finally came out, outed himself?
Yep.
He's in hiding because of the death threats.
Oh, is he now?
Right. Yeah. Krebs, the head of the cybersecurity election.
Yeah, they threatened to
his life.
DeGenova called for him to be
who's
shot.
a former prosecutor.
Yeah.
Right. This is a guy who hasn't been disbarred. Why hasn't he been disbarred?
That's a hell of a question.
There's no accountability. This is the problem. But the bigger picture here of what you're saying is there used to be left versus right. Today it's up versus down. And I find that I have a lot more in common with never Trumpers who are at least willing to stand up for the real fundamental basic values of this country, the foundational values,
right,
of freedom and equality and all of that, the rule of law, elections, you know, the stuff we always took for granted. I'd love to argue. I'm willing to argue about religious exemptions in the Equality Act. I don't think that's something that I would fear. I mean, there's always been a clash between religious freedom and equality in America. It's built in. It's not a bug.
It is.
It's you know, this is what the system is like. And I took a class from a professor at Harvard Law who explained this and said, guys, don't get all bent out of shape because people want religious exemptions. This is America. They're the
It's funny that you said what you said because, you know, John and I have had a number of never Trumpers or, you know, breakaway Republicans or whatever you want to call them on the show. And what's hilarious is that John's friends with David Frum. And David, who I think is a perfectly fine guy, but I don't happen to have a personal relationship with him. And a bunch of these left-wing nuts grab that, and they still come after me for like, hey, are you having dinner tonight with David Frum again? And you know, and I always tell them I am. I usually link to him and say, where are we going tonight? You know, just to have fun with it. But I mean, it's, you know, it's that kind of sort of attitude of you know, here's David Frum now, whatever, you know, and you can make lots of arguments for his past positions, but, you know, the guy has said he was wrong on Iraq. He's out there right now making arguments for numerous issues we care about, gay rights and gun safety and choice and immigration. I mean, it's sort of like, are you insane? You don't want someone like that making those arguments for you?
Right. I mean, it's like the even better example than David Frum, who's pretty sort of straight-laced and stuff, is Bill Kristol, who's been on like with Ari Melber and some rappers and stuff, and they're buddies now. Bill Kristol goes, one day he tweets, you know, I think I've become a liberal feminist.
He's following me on Twitter. I noticed the other day, and I went, Bill Kristol?
Let's embrace these people, right?
Yeah, no, it's weird though. Bill Kristol especially. I mean,
if you care about democracy and you care about the rule of law and these types of things, as you said, all of the principles that we haven't always followed, and you don't just care about settling scores and trying to call somebody a name because you didn't like something they did 10 years ago, that's what, you know, that's the problem. That I stand with the former, not the latter.
Should we have Bill Kristol on and really freak people out, Cliff?
I'd love to.
The historical analogy to this is in the 30s in Germany, everybody jumped on the Nazi bandwagon. But in the occupied countries, everybody, socialists, unionists, communists, capitalists, monarchists, they all united to fight the Nazis, right? Or the Vichy government, or whatever it might be in whatever occupied territory it was. Those people had to put their differences aside to fight the bigger problem. What America needs is an external enemy again, right?
I've made that argument, that exact argument on this show, you know, which is that when people come after them, I'm like, do you not understand that what happened in Germany is that they failed to unite? That the socialists, a lot of the socialists and communists decided that it would be better to have a buffoon like Hitler because he would discredit, you know, capitalism. And so they were like, let's let him go, as opposed to everybody from the sort of center right left to the left, far left, coming together and saying this needs to be stopped.
And that's not happening here because whatever those former Republicans are, they're going along with it. And that's why this country's at great risk, because the next time the clownish Mussolini type will be more of a Hitlerian, a Ted Cruz or a Josh.
That's what we always talk about, and smarter and better at what he does.
They will have learned from this experience on how to corrupt legislators and all the rest.
It works.
If Biden doesn't take this seriously, not Biden per se, but if his attorney general doesn't take this seriously, we're doomed.
And they're going to be back. They're going to be back in 4 years. But the
DOJ, that's the truth, is they have to take it seriously, because if there aren't prosecutions, then the incentive structure is I can do anything, which is what these guys think now.
That's right. And so that's where it has to change. So, I mean, I'm just hoping, and I will say, based on the feedback I've gotten from my talk with Andrew, I was not trying to reach people on my side of the aisle. I was trying to reach the open-minded center-right people.
Right. And by the way, Dana's talking that she did a 2-hour interview on Andrew Sullivan's podcast the other day. That's what she's referring to.
Right. And so most of the feedback on that is, wow, I had no idea.
There you go.
Thanks for enlightening me. Thanks for having a civil conversation. I haven't heard a civil conversation on sex and gender in like forever.
Yeah.
If we did more of that, we'd be better off. It's those conversations that, as I said, got us to this point today. We wouldn't be here today if we hadn't had those conversations with our families, our friends, and communities.
I want to say quickly before we, I know we've got to
wrap. It's been 2 hours. We've got to wrap up.
And actually, my phone is down to about 7%. He's probably going to die.
Okay.
But I do want to say, Dana, I can actually think of. I'd love to talk to you off air and reach out to you because I can think of an opportunity for you to help educate in a form exactly like that, where you'll reach middle of the road and people like that. And so, if it's okay, I'm going to reach out through John and see.
Yeah, I know what Cliff's talking about. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
during Hanukkah, if you want, after Hanukkah, I don't know.
Well, whenever you can, and makes them. That's right. We're almost there. I guess it's the 10th.
It's a week tonight,
Yeah, but I want to. Yeah. Go ahead, John. I'm just so I say.
Go ahead, Cliff. I was going to say, and then Dana wrap up.
My phone is on fumes at this point.
Yeah.
So
Dana, why don't you wrap this up? Any closing thoughts, and then we're going to go.
Well, my closing thoughts would be that evolution is a good thing. It may be happening a little too rapidly for some of us, grandparents and stuff, but it's a good thing. But in so doing, we need to be clear about what we're speaking so we can make sure we get on the same page, we understand one another, we can do the research that we need to do in order to help advance our community and our country. And we should not be afraid to discuss these issues just because they might offend somebody in the moment. We need all to develop a thicker skin. We used to have that 20 years ago when there were few of us that were out. I remember in DC at the 2003 Trans Day of Remembrance, there were like 30 out trans activists in this region. Today, there are many more.
Right.
And you'd think that would be better, but people seem to be a lot more fragile today than we were then. I guess we couldn't afford to be fragile. Those who were fragile didn't make it. Today, you can be fragile because you're in a community. But that's not, at least for my generation, that's not what transition's been about. Transition has been about to live your authentic life in the world.
It wasn't
to become a third gender or a third sex. It wasn't to just live within a trans community or whatever. It was to simply continue doing what you were doing, what you went to school to do, or what you hope to do in your profession or your business or with your family as the person you are.
Right.
And I think that's been true for the gay community. And I hope that will be true for non-binary people and genderqueer people and such in the future. Be your full self. Like the old army thing, be all you can be. But be all of that, because the world is wonderful out there. There's a lot of stuff to do. You can become an astronaut. Just imagine being the first trans astronaut or something.
There you go.
We're going back to that thing. And now you can be, like John Glenn showed, 77 years old. You can be a US senator and be an astronaut. They're going to need people to take that. Elon Musk, didn't he want a one-way mission to Mars? So he wanted a bunch of old people to be that crew. I mean, I'd be willing to do that. Why not? Right? One-way ticket to Mars. Be the first trans person on Mars. That would be.
But they have good streaming TV there. That's the important thing to me.
Yeah, well, that's what matters, right? Because he's got his convertible that's flying out towards the sun, or something like that.
I mean, I gotta have Ozark and things like that to watch.
That's right.
I can't do it.
Especially now. I mean, you do need that, or you'd be dying, right?
That's what I'm saying.
All right,
Star Trek Discovery still has episodes to go.
Okay, so I just hope that today's a new one. I haven't watched it yet. It's nice to see that Spock's efforts to reunify the Romulans.
Hey, stop! I'm not caught up with this year yet. Don't go there.
Okay, sorry, spoiler alert.
Do not spoil this. Stop it.
But that's just Spock's another good Jewish boy who did the right thing and stuck to it over his 250-year lifespan or whatever, and got the job done. We've been fortunate, as I said.
Both Captain Kirk and Spock were Jewish. It was pretty cool.
That's right. Of course, I think like that.
I didn't know that till the Adam Sandler song.
Well, of course not, for Hanukkah and stuff. But, you had a black woman, you had a gay man, you had a Russian, right, on the bridge back in the 60s. I mean, breakthrough stuff. And, life is better that way. I've been around the world plenty of times. It's much more interesting to engage with other cultures.
That's the key, what I try to say to people. Right? We should all want diversity and whatever, because it's the most interesting thing in the world. I always want to be around a wide variety of people.
Right. Somebody made the comment that wars were God's way of introducing Americans to geography.
It's true. That's funny.
What the hell is Vietnam? Where is Korea? Right?
But find Crimea on a map. Yeah.
Right. It's the
Iraq. It's in the Middle East.
Right. It's hard. This is why Iraq happened, because nobody knew where it was or what it was about. They had no clue.
There's a sad truth to all of this.
Yeah, and it's
All right.
that lack of exposure to different cultures that's really at the core of this. The fear
All right,
and
we've got
anxiety that people feel.
We've got to wrap up, or Cliff's going to disappear on us. And
mean,
it's been 2
you may
hours.
want
I've got to
that,
edit this. All right, Dana, I suspect we'll have you back because I wanted to get into all of these, like the hot button issues like sports and everything else, but not now because people are going to be exhausted. So,
Well, at least sports is a hot button issue and not bathrooms anymore. So,
yeah,
there's
true.
progress.
Well, they're trying.
Good point.
They're trying on the right, but we'll see.
No, it's sports, and we can work that out. It's complicated, but
Yeah.
All
and
right.
that brings intersex into the trans stuff.
Oh God, just not again.
Well, we can tell you, we're definitely having a round 2 of this sometime.
We're going to have round 2.
Very
All right.
good.
Thanks, Jake. This is
Tyson
amazing.
versus whomever, whatever, round 2. That's
Exactly.
Yeah. Great meeting you, Dana, and
All right.
thank you for being here.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was great.
That was amazing. I told you she's good.
Well, that's
I'm
the key. Is
exhausted.
that
This is like Malcolm exhausted.
it is, but that's the point, is that she is needed, frankly, because it's having that inviting, open personality that makes it so easy to talk about. I told you before the show, I was scared that I was going to be boxed in and be scared to say things and whatever, because I don't want to, and she is so inviting and so obviously not going to get offended by.
Oh, the rest of Twitter may still be pissed at us for this whole interview, but at least
I don't care about them. I care much more about.
No, she's amazing. Yep. All right, guys, it's Thursday. Okay, it is Thursday. All right, so then we'll be back next week. We've got lots of requests out to people. One already said yes, so we'll probably have him next week. Bill Shear will be back. And then we got requests. I had asked Nia Vardalos to come on, who's my Twitter friend. She is working on several movies, and because of COVID and everything else, she said, how about in the spring or the summer when her movies come out, and she's
great.
And then she said she could be much more relaxed and fun.
I've got a good half dozen folks I asked, including 1 or 2 actors, I won't say now because it's not confirmed, who you've all met or not met, but have seen on various things. And I think we have a good shot at them.
Okay, good. All right, guys, then we're signing off right now, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for being here as always, guys. Have a great weekend.
Bye.